For 5 years, I believed my son burned alive in his own piano studio. For 5 years, I sent his wife $50,000 every January. Money I earned with aching hands and 4 hours of sleep. $250,000. Then my grandson heard a piano playing across the street, grabbed my arm, and said something that made my blood turn to ice. "Grandma, that's Daddy's secret song. He always plays the wrong note in the middle on purpose." Before we go any further, thank you for being here. If this story already caught your attention, take a second to tell me in the comments where you are watching from. It really helps this channel grow. Also, a gentle reminder, some elements have been altered for narrative and educational purposes. Any similarities are coincidental, but the truth behind the message is meant to help. My name is Margaret Caldwell. I am 65 years old, and I own a small bakery on the corner of Bull Street and Liberty Street in Savannah, Georgia. Caldwell's Bakery. My grandfather opened it in 1955. 3 generations of flour-dusted hands and pre-dawn alarms, the kind of place where regulars know your name and you know theirs. Mrs. Beaumont comes in every Tuesday at 7 for her almond croissant and Earl Grey. Old Jean shows up at 8 for black coffee and a blueberry muffin. Same order for 11 years. They all knew my son Daniel. They all came to his funeral. They watched me fall apart and put myself back together. One loaf of bread at a time. Every morning. I wake up at 3. My hands ache before my feet hit the cold floor. The arthritis started 6 years ago in my left knuckle, and now it has spread to both hands, curling my fingers like old roots. Some mornings I can barely grip the dough, but I grip it anyway. Because the bakery is all I have left. The bakery and Oliver. Oliver is my grandson. 6 years old. Daniel's boy. Every other Saturday, I pick him up from his mother Lisa's house, and we spend the morning together. We drive to Forsyth Park, buy lemonade near the fountain, and walk through the farmer's market while he tells me about school. He is a quiet child, careful, always watching. He has Daniel's eyes, dark brown, always thinking. And when he smiles, he looks so much like his father that it makes my chest hurt. Daniel died 5 years ago. At least, that is what they told me. A fire at his piano studio on East Broad Street. He had opened it 2 years before, teaching lessons to kids in the neighborhood. Piano was everything to Daniel. He started playing at 4, sitting on his father Henry's lap at the old upright in our living room. By 12, he could play Chopin from memory. By 25, he had his own studio and a waiting list of students. The fire took it all. That is what the police said. That is what Lisa said. That is what I believed for 5 years, while I sent $50,000 every January to a woman who barely texted me back. But I am getting ahead of myself. That September Saturday started like any other. I picked Oliver up at 9. Lisa handed him over at the door without inviting me in. She never did. A quick wave, a half smile. And the door closed before I had buckled him into his car seat. We drove to Forsyth Park with the windows down. The air was warm and thick, the way Savannah gets in early fall when summer refuses to let go. Oliver was telling me about his spelling test. He got every word right, except beautiful. He spelled it B-E-A-U-T-F-U-L. Missing the I. I told him that was pretty close. He said close was not the same as right. That sounded exactly like something Daniel would have said. We walked through the market. Vegetables, honey, handmade soap. Oliver held my hand and pointed at things he liked. Then we passed the coffee shop on the east side of the park. Brood Awakening. A little place with outdoor tables and an open door. Someone was playing piano inside. Not loud. Just drifting through the morning air. A soft melody I did not recognize. Oliver stopped walking. His hand tightened around mine. Not a gentle squeeze. A grip. The kind a child uses when something scares them. "Grandma." His voice dropped to a whisper. I had to lean down to hear him. "That song. That is Daddy's song." My stomach tightened. "Honey, lots of people play piano." "No." He shook his head. Listen. Right there. He plays the wrong note in the middle. On purpose. Daddy always did that. He said perfect music was boring. I listened. The melody continued. And then, right in the center of a phrase, a single note landed wrong. Not a mistake. A deliberate stumble. A note placed there like a signature. Nobody else does that, Grandma. His eyes filled with tears. Only Daddy. Oliver, your father passed away. You know that. He grabbed my sleeve with both fists. His face tilted up, and what I saw in his eyes was not sadness. It was fear. Grandma, please. Stop sending her money. The money you send Mommy. Stop. And watch her. Just watch her. You will see. I could not speak. A 6-year-old child was standing in front of me at a Saturday farmer's market, shaking, begging me to stop sending his mother money, and his reason was a piano playing a wrong note in a coffee shop. Oliver, what do you mean? Watch her. He let go of my sleeve, stepped back. The fear in his eyes shifted to something older than 6, the expression of a child carrying a secret too heavy for his shoulders. Just watch her, Grandma. You will see. He would not say another word. Turned and walked toward the lemonade stand like nothing had happened. But his hands were still shaking, and the piano inside Brood Awakening kept playing. That melody with its one wrong note drifting through the September air like a ghost that refused to leave. The drive to Lisa's house was silent. Oliver stared out the window, clutching his backpack against his chest. Lisa was waiting on the front steps, arms crossed. You are late, she said. Traffic. I lied. Oliver hurried inside without saying goodbye. Lisa barely looked at him. Go do your homework. He disappeared. I watched through the window as he sat alone at the kitchen table. Lisa walked past him, phone to her ear, not glancing his way. Lisa, I called. Is everything okay with Oliver? She shrugged. He is fine. Kids get moody. Then she added, Hey, any chance you could send next year's payment early? Some expenses coming up. It was September. I never sent the money before January. What kind of expenses? House stuff. She was not looking at me. Forget it. January is fine. The door closed. I sat in my car, engine running, arthritic hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. Oliver's words looped through my mind. Stop sending her money. Watch her. You will see. And underneath it all, that piano. That one wrong note hanging in the warm air like a question I was not ready to answer. I did not sleep that night. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling of my small apartment behind the bakery, listening to the old building settle and creak around me. Oliver's voice played over and over in my head. Watch her. You will see. But underneath his words, deeper and darker, was the memory I had spent 5 years trying to bury. The night they told me Daniel was gone. It was a Thursday, March 7th. I remember because I had just finished frosting a 3-tier cake for the Patterson wedding that weekend. My hands were stained with buttercream, and I was wiping them on a towel when the doorbell rang at 2 in the morning. Nobody rings your doorbell at 2 in the morning with good news. 2 officers stood on my front porch, a man and a woman. Their faces carefully blank. In that way, police officers learn when they are about to end someone's world. The porch light threw shadows across their uniforms, and I remember thinking the street behind them was too quiet, too still for what was coming. Mrs. Caldwell? The woman spoke first. I am Officer Delgado. This is Officer Haynes. May we come inside? Henry was already behind me. I felt his hand on my shoulder, warm and steady the way it always was. He was 63 then, a retired carpenter with sawdust permanently embedded in the creases of his palms. 38 years married, and he still reached for me in his sleep every night. There has been a fire, Officer Delgado said. She was sitting on our couch now, hands folded in her lap. At your son's studio on East Broad Street. Studio. Not Daniel's place. Not your son's piano school. Studio. Like using a clinical word, could soften what came next. "Is he at the hospital?" Henry asked. His voice was calm, but his grip on my shoulder tightened. Officer Delgado looked at her partner, then back at us. "Sir, I am very sorry." By the time crews arrived, the building was fully engulfed. "Your son was inside." The rest came in fragments. Words I heard but could not process. Structural collapse. Accelerant, not suspected. Candle near fabric. The body was recovered but badly burned. His wife Lisa identified him through dental records. Henry's hand slid off my shoulder. I turned and watched him sink into the armchair behind us like his bones had dissolved. He did not cry, did not speak, just sat there, staring at nothing, his carpenter's hands hanging limp at his sides. I do not remember what I said to the officers. I do not remember them leaving. I remember standing in the kitchen at 4 a.m, buttercream still on the towel, realizing that my son, my only child, the boy who had learned to play Chopin on the old upright in our living room, was gone. The funeral was 5 days later. Closed casket. Had to be, they said. The fire had been too intense. Lisa stood beside me at the service, Oliver on her hip. He was barely a year old. Too young to understand why all these people were crying. Too young to know he would never hear his father play piano again. Never feel Daniel's hands guiding his tiny fingers across the keys the way Daniel had promised he would someday. Lisa cried beautifully. I remember thinking that, even through my own grief, she cried the way women cry in movies, tears rolling down her cheeks in perfect lines, her voice breaking at just the right moments. She held Oliver against her chest and thanked everyone for coming. She hugged me and whispered, "I am so sorry, Margaret. I loved him so much." I believed her. Why would I not? She was my son's wife. She was holding my grandson. She was grieving. The funeral home gave us the urn afterward. Simple brass. About the size of a shoebox. Cool to the touch. Heavier than I expected. They said it contained Daniel's cremated remains. Everything that was left of my boy. Reduced to powder. Inside a metal container. I placed it on the mantel above our fireplace. Beside the framed photo of Daniel at his first piano recital, age 7, wearing a clip-on tie that was too big and a grin that was too wide. Henry stared at that urn for hours the first night. Did not eat. Did not speak. Just sat in his armchair and stared, like if he looked long enough, he could see through the brass to whatever was inside. The next morning I found him in the living room at dawn. He had not gone to bed. He was standing at the mantel, one hand resting on the urn, whispering something I could not hear. When I touched his shoulder, he flinched like I had woken him from a dream. "I keep thinking I hear him playing," Henry said. His voice was raw. That song he used to practice. The one with the wrong note. My throat closed. Daniel had this habit. He would deliberately play one wrong note in the middle of his favorite pieces. Said it kept the music human. Said perfection was boring. His students thought it was hilarious. Henry and I pretended to be annoyed, but secretly we loved it. It was so perfectly Daniel. "He is gone, Henry," I said. And the words tasted like poison. Henry looked at me. His eyes were red and empty and ancient. "I know," he whispered. "That is the problem." After that, something in Henry began to shut down. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just slowly, quietly, the way a candle burns lower until there is nothing left but smoke. He stopped going to his workshop behind the house. Stopped eating full meals. Stopped laughing at the television shows he used to love. He would sit in his armchair for hours, staring at that urn, stroking the brass with his thumb the way he used to stroke Daniel's hair when our boy fell asleep on his lap. Every night before bed, Henry kissed the urn, pressed his lips to the cool brass lid, and whispered, "Good night, son." Every single night. For 8 months. I tried to help him. Tried to pull him back. But grief is a river, and Henry was drowning in it. And my arms were not strong enough to hold us both above the surface. Not when I was drowning too. I kept the bakery open because I had to. Because bills did not stop when your son died. Because the mortgage still came, and the flour still needed ordering, and Mrs. Beaumont still needed her Tuesday croissant. I baked at 3 in the morning and cried while the bread rose. Wiped my eyes with flour-dusted hands and opened the doors at 6 with a smile that felt like a mask. And I made a promise. Before Daniel opened his studio, he had sat with me in the bakery kitchen late one night, nervous and excited, and said, "Mom, if anything ever happens to me, take care of Oliver. Make sure he has everything." I had laughed and told him nothing was going to happen. But I promised. Of course I promised. So when Lisa called a month after the funeral and said she was struggling with expenses, I did what family does. I sent her the first check, $50,000, January of the following year. I did not think twice. I did not ask questions. My son was dead. My grandson needed care, and his mother was raising him alone. $50,000 a year was everything I could spare. Sometimes more than I could spare. But it was what Daniel would have wanted. It was what I had promised. And Henry kept kissing that urn every night, kept whispering goodnight to our son, kept fading, slowly and quietly, like a candle that had forgotten how to hold its flame. 8 months after Daniel's funeral, the candle finally went out. I found Henry in his workshop on a Tuesday morning in November. The workshop was a small wooden building behind our house, the place where he had spent 30 years turning raw lumber into furniture. Bookshelves, rocking chairs, dining tables. He built things with his hands the way Daniel made music with his. Patiently, lovingly, with attention to every detail. After Daniel died, he stopped building. But he still went out there every morning and sat in the old folding chair beside his workbench, surrounded by sawdust and silence and the ghosts of things he would never finish. That Tuesday, I brought him coffee at 7 like I always did. The workshop door was open. The November air was cold and gray. The kind of Savannah morning where the Spanish moss hangs heavy and still, like the whole city is holding its breath. Henry was in his chair, head tilted to one side, eyes closed, one hand resting on the workbench, fingers curled around a photograph. I set the coffee down and touched his shoulder. He was cold. Not sleeping cold. Gone cold. The photograph in his hand was Daniel at 10 years old, sitting at the piano. Mid-laugh, looking up at the camera with those dark brown eyes Oliver had inherited. Henry had been holding our son's picture when his heart decided it had carried enough. The doctors called it a stroke. I knew better. You can die of a broken heart. I had watched it happen in slow motion for 8 months. Watched my husband dissolve from the inside out. Watched the man who built rocking chairs and dining tables and a life with me for 38 years simply stop wanting to be alive. They buried Henry beside an empty plot I had reserved for myself. The headstone read, "Beloved husband and father." I stood at that grave and realized I had nothing left. My son was dead. My husband was dead. My house was too big and too quiet and too full of memories that cut like glass. So I sold it. Took the money and paid off the bakery's mortgage. Moved into the small apartment above the storage room behind the shop. 1 bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. The urn came with me. I placed it on the narrow mantel above the electric fireplace, beside the same photo of Daniel at his first recital. Different house, same grief. And I kept baking. 3 in the morning, every morning. Flour, water, yeast, salt. The rhythm of bread kept me alive the way breathing keeps you alive. Not because you choose it, but because your body refuses to stop. My hands hurt worse every year. The arthritis spread from my left knuckle to my right, then to my wrists, then to my fingers, until some mornings I had to soak them in warm water for 20 minutes before I could grip anything at all. But I gripped the dough and I kneaded it and I baked it and I opened the doors at 6 and I smiled. I kept my promise to Daniel. $50,000 every January, wired to Lisa's account. I never missed a year. January, year 1. 50,000. Lisa texted, "Got the transfer. Thank you so much, Margaret. Oliver is doing great." 9 words. That was the longest message she ever sent. January, year 2. 50,000. Received it. Thanks. 5 words. January, year 3. 50,000. Transfer came through. 3 words. By year 4, she stopped saying thank you altogether. Just a thumbs up emoji. Year 5. Nothing. I checked my bank app to confirm the transfer had gone through. It had. Lisa never acknowledged it. $250,000 over 5 years. I tracked every payment in a ledger I kept in the bakery office. The same kind of ledger my grandfather had used to track flour orders in 1955. Neat columns. Dates. Amounts. Memo lines that all read the same thing. For Oliver. But what did I actually know about how the money was being used? Lisa never sent receipts, never mentioned Oliver's school, his activities, his doctor visits. I asked sometimes, in careful texts that took me 10 minutes to compose because I did not want to seem pushy. How is Oliver doing in school? Fine. Does he need winter clothes? I could pick some up. We are good. Would love to see him for his birthday. We will figure something out. We never figured something out. I got Oliver every other Saturday for 4 hours. Lemonade. And the farmer's market. That was it. No birthday parties. No school plays. No holidays. Just every other Saturday. And even those felt borrowed. Like Lisa was doing me a favor by lending me my own grandson. I told myself she was private. Told myself everyone grieved differently. Told myself a young woman, raising a child alone needed space and patience, and $50,000 a year without being questioned about it. I told myself all these things because the alternative was too frightening to consider. The alternative meant I had been a fool. And fools do not get to keep their promises. But every November, like clockwork, Lisa would text asking if I could send the payment early. Some expenses coming up. Always the same phrase. Always November. I always said yes, because that is what family does. You do not interrogate your daughter-in-law about money when your son is dead, and your grandson needs stability. At least, that is what I believed. The night after Oliver's warning at the park, I stood in my small apartment staring at the urn on the mantel. The same urn Henry had kissed every night for 8 months. The same urn I had carried from our old house to this apartment like it was the most precious thing I owned. I reached out and touched the brass. Cool under my fingertips. Smooth. I had never opened it. In 5 years, I had never once unscrewed the lid. Some part of me could not bear to see what was inside. Could not reduce my son to a handful of ashes. So I left it sealed and I honored it. And I talked to it on bad nights when the loneliness was loud enough to drown out the silence. But now Oliver's voice echoed through the quiet room. Stop sending her money. Watch her. You will see. And underneath that, another voice. Henry's. From a morning that felt like a lifetime ago. I keep thinking, I hear him playing. That song with the wrong note. I pulled my hand back from the urn. Stood there in the dim glow of the electric fireplace, the apartment silent except for the hum of the bakery refrigerators on the other side of the wall. 5 years of grief. 5 years of checks. 5 years of trusting a woman who could not even send a full sentence in response to $50,000. What if I had been wrong? What if the promise I made to Daniel had been keeping me blind to something I should have seen years ago? What if this urn, this brass box I had honored like it was sacred, was not what they told me it was? The thought cracked through me like lightning through a dead tree. I did not sleep that night either. The days after Oliver's warning moved slowly, like the hours before a storm when the air turns heavy and the birds go quiet, and you know something is coming but you cannot see it yet. I went through the motions. Up at 3. Knead the dough. Bake the bread. Open the doors at 6. Smile. But behind the smile, behind the flour dust and the cash register and the small talk with customers, my mind was circling. I started noticing things about Lisa that I had ignored for 5 years. She never called. Not once in 5 years had Lisa picked up a phone and called me just to talk. Every communication was text, and every text was a response to something I had initiated. I scrolled through our entire message history one night. 5 years of conversation on a screen, and counted. I had sent 214 messages. Lisa had sent 47. Most of hers were 3 words or fewer. She never sent photos of Oliver. Not a single school picture. Not a snapshot from a birthday party. Not a video of him learning to ride a bike. Everything I knew about Oliver's life came from Oliver himself during our every other Saturday mornings. 4 hours twice a month. That was all the access I had to my own grandson. She never invited me inside her house. In 5 years, every handoff happened at the front door. Oliver out, door closed. Oliver back, door closed. I had not seen the inside of that house since Daniel's funeral, when Lisa had hosted a small gathering afterward, and I had been too numb to notice anything except the empty chair where my son should have been sitting. And the money. Always the money. Every November, the same text. Any chance you could send it early? Some expenses. Every year, the same vague excuse. House stuff. Oliver's school things. Car repairs. Never specific. Never documented. Never questioned. Because I was too afraid that asking questions would mean admitting I did not trust her. And not trusting her would mean that everything I had done for 5 years, every check, every sacrifice, every morning of arthritic hands gripping dough at 3 in the morning, had been for nothing. But Oliver had asked me to watch. So, I watched. It was the following Wednesday. The morning rush at Caldwell's had settled into its usual rhythm. Mrs. Beaumont had come and gone with her croissant and Earl Grey. Old Jean was on his second cup of black coffee, reading the newspaper in the corner booth the way he did every morning, turning pages so slowly you would think he was memorizing each one. The man walked in at 9:15. I noticed him immediately because he was not a regular. Strangers were not unusual. Savannah was a tourist town. But something about this one made me look twice. Mid-30s. Thin, dark hair that needed a cut. Wearing a brown leather jacket that looked expensive. He moved quickly, purposefully, like someone who did not want to be noticed. He went straight to the counter. "Almond croissant," he said without looking at the display case. "And a coffee." I pulled the croissant from the case and poured the coffee. "Cream? And sugar?" "No." "But could you add a few drops of vanilla extract?" He glanced at me briefly, then looked away. "Just a few drops. It is the only way to drink it." My hand froze on the coffee pot. Vanilla extract in coffee. Daniel used to do the same thing. Had done it since college. Every morning, he would come into the bakery before heading to his studio. Grab a coffee from the pot I kept behind the counter and add 3 drops of vanilla extract. "Turns regular coffee into something worth drinking, Mom," he used to say. It drove Henry crazy. "Just drink it black like a normal person." Henry would grumble. Daniel would laugh and add a 4th drop just to annoy him. I stared at the man. Tried to find Daniel in his face. The shape of his jaw. The way he held his shoulders. Something familiar. Tugged at the edge of my memory. But I could not pull it into focus. Like trying to read a sign through fog. "That all for you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Yes." He handed me a 20 without looking up. His fingers were long, thin, the fingers of someone who worked with their hands. "11.53 is your change." He took it, picked up the croissant and coffee, and turned toward the door. That should have been the end of it. A stranger, buying breakfast. Nothing more. But as he passed me, something happened. A flicker. Not recognition exactly, but something deeper. The way he tilted his head slightly as he pushed through the door. The angle of his neck. The way his left hand reached for the handle while his right balanced the coffee cup. I had seen that exact movement 1,000 times. Daniel opening the bakery door every morning. Coffee in one hand, the other reaching for the handle with that same tilt of the head. "Sir?" I called. He stopped. Glanced back. For half a second, our eyes met, and I felt something electric pass between us. Something I could not name. "Have we met?" I asked. His expression did not change. "I don't think so. You just remind me of someone. I get that a lot." He pushed through the door and was gone. The bell above the frame chimed twice, and then fell silent. I stood behind the counter, heart pounding, hands trembling against the register. Mrs. Beaumont's empty teacup sat on the corner table. Old Jean turned another page. The bakery smelled like butter and cinnamon and fresh bread, the same way it had smelled every morning for 70 years. Everything was normal. Nothing felt right. 20 minutes later, I stepped outside to bring in the sandwich board sign. The morning sun hit my face, warm and bright, and for a moment, I squinted against the glare. That is when I saw them. Across the street, half a block down, parked along the curb. A silver sedan. The man from the bakery stood beside it, leaning against the passenger door. And beside him, standing close, was Lisa. They were talking. Lisa said something and the man laughed. She reached out and touched his arm, brief and familiar. The way you touch someone you have touched 1,000 times before. Then she walked around to the driver's side and got in. The man climbed into the passenger seat. The car pulled away from the curb and disappeared down Bull Street. I stood on the sidewalk holding the sandwich board, frozen. The sign felt impossibly heavy in my arthritic hands. Cars passed. A tourist couple walked by arguing about where to find the best shrimp and grits. The world kept moving and I stood still. Lisa, the man from my bakery, together, in a car, half a block from where Daniel used to sit every morning and drink coffee with vanilla extract. I went back inside, locked the door, flipped the sign to closed. Old Jean looked up from his newspaper, surprised. I never closed early. Not once in 30 years. "Everything okay, Margaret?" he asked. "Fine, Jean. Just not feeling well." He nodded, gathered his paper, and left. The bell chimed. Then silence. I stood alone in my bakery. The fluorescent lights hummed. The ovens ticked as they cooled. Outside, Savannah moved through its Wednesday morning like nothing had happened. But inside my chest, something was building. A pressure. A heat. The same feeling I had the night Oliver grabbed my sleeve at the park. Vanilla extract in coffee. My son used to do the exact same thing. Said it was the only way to drink it. And now a stranger was ordering it in my bakery, 20 feet from Daniel's favorite seat. And then getting into a car with my daughter-in-law, who had never once mentioned knowing any man at all. Oliver's voice again. Small and trembling. "Watch her, Grandma. You will see." I was starting to see. And what I saw terrified me. When you need someone to help you see clearly, you call the person who spent their life looking for what others missed. Frank Morrison had been my friend for 30 years. We met when his daughter took piano lessons from Daniel, back when Daniel was still teaching out of our living room. Frank and Henry became poker buddies. After Henry died, Frank was the one who showed up at the bakery every Friday with a sandwich and a refusal to leave until I had eaten it. He was 66 years old. Retired from the Savannah Morning News after 3 decades of investigative journalism. The kind of reporter who spent months chasing a single story, turning over rocks, following paper trails, knocking on doors that people wanted to keep shut. He had exposed a corrupt city councilman in 2008 and a construction fraud ring in 2012. Frank believed that truth lived in the details, and he had spent his career proving it. He still carried a small black notebook in his back pocket. spiral-bound, the kind you could buy at any drugstore. He filled one every 2 months, then stored them in a filing cabinet at home. 30 years of notebooks, 30 years of details. I called him that Wednesday evening, an hour after closing the bakery early. My hands were shaking, not from arthritis this time, but from something deeper. "Frank, I need help. Something is wrong, and I do not know who else to call." He did not ask questions. "I will be there in 20 minutes. He walked in at 6:30. Gray hair cut short, reading glasses on a cord around his neck, flannel shirt rolled to the elbows. He looked like a retired English teacher, which was exactly the kind of disguise that had made him a good journalist. People underestimated Frank Morrison. That was their mistake. He pulled a stool to the counter and looked at me the way he used to look at sources. Not polite, nodding while waiting for his turn to talk. Real listening. Head tilted, eyes focused, picking apart every word. "Start from the beginning," he said, pulling out the notebook. So I did. I told him about Oliver at the park, the piano from Brood Awakening, the wrong note, Oliver gripping my sleeve, begging me to stop sending money. I told him about the man this morning, the almond croissant, the vanilla extract in coffee, the familiar tilt of his head, and seeing him get into a silver sedan with Lisa half a block from my bakery. Frank did not interrupt. His pen moved in small, tight strokes across the page. When I finished, he set the pen down. "How much money have you sent Lisa total?" $250,000. His pen tapped the notebook twice, a habit I had noticed over the years. He tapped when something bothered him. "And how much of that can you account for? Receipts? Invoices? Anything showing where it went?" I opened my mouth, closed it. "None." "None? She never sent receipts. I assumed it was for Oliver." "You assumed." Frank's voice was neutral, not judgmental, precise. "In 30 years of journalism, Margaret, the money trail never lies. People lie. Documents lie. But where the money goes always tells the truth." He picked up his pen. "Pull your bank records tonight. Every transfer. Dates. Amounts. Everything." We closed the bakery together, then went upstairs to my apartment. My kitchen table was small, but I cleared it and spread out what I had. 5 years of bank statements kept in a shoebox in my closet, the old-fashioned way. Because my grandfather taught me you should always have a record you could hold in your hands. I laid them out year by year. January year 1. $50,000 wired to Lisa Monroe Caldwell. Memo line. For Oliver. January. Year 2. Same amount. Same memo. Year 3. 4. 5. 5 identical transactions. $250,000 sent with nothing but faith and a promise to a dead son. Frank sat across from me, reading glasses on, examining each statement like courtroom evidence. He made notes, circled figures, cross-referenced dates. "When does she ask for early payment?" he asked. "November. Every year." "Same excuse?" "Expenses coming up." "That is all she ever says." Frank tapped his pen twice. "A woman receiving $50,000 a year asking for it early every November is not struggling with expenses, Margaret. She is anticipating them. There is a difference." "What about communication?" he continued. "Texts, emails, anything where she talks about how the money is being used." I handed him my phone. He scrolled through 5 years of messages, swiping slowly, face completely still. 214 messages from you, he said. 47 from her. Not a single one mentions a specific expense, a specific need, or a specific plan for Oliver. He set the phone down. The kitchen light hummed above us. The bakery refrigerators vibrated through the wall. $250,000, Frank said quietly. And you cannot name one single thing it was spent on. No, not one. He closed the notebook, took off his glasses, and rubbed his eyes the way he did when thinking hard about something he did not want to say. Margaret, I am not saying Lisa has done anything wrong. I am saying the pattern is unusual. The lack of communication, the early requests, the man at the bakery, Oliver's warning. He paused. In my experience, when a child tells you something is wrong, something is wrong. Children do not have the imagination for this kind of deception. What do we do? Frank opened the notebook to a fresh page. Wrote 2 words at the top that I could not read from across the table. I would learn later, they said. Watch Lisa. We start simple, he said. We observe. Document. Follow the money. See where it leads. He stood, tucked the notebook into his back pocket, and headed for the door. Paused with his hand on the frame. Margaret, you are doing the right thing. Asking questions is not betrayal. It is protection. The door closed. I sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by 5 years of bank statements. The urn on the mantel in the next room, and Frank's words settling into the silence like stones dropped into still water. $250,000. Not one thing accounted for. And a man in a brown leather jacket who drank his coffee with vanilla extract the same way my dead son used to. Surveillance, Frank told me, is 90% boredom and 10% adrenaline. The trick is staying awake long enough for the 10% to show up. We started the following Monday. Frank picked me up at 5:30 in the morning in his gray Ford sedan. The kind of car so ordinary it could park anywhere without drawing a second glance. He had 2 thermoses of coffee, a bag of granola bars, a camera with a telephoto lens, and his notebook. Always the notebook. We parked 3 houses down from Lisa's place on Abercorn Street. Close enough to see the driveway and front door. Far enough not to look suspicious. Just 2 old friends, sitting in a car on a public road, Frank said. Perfectly legal. Lisa's house was the first thing that bothered me. It was a 2-story colonial, with cream-colored siding and black shutters. Azaleas lined the walkway. The lawn was freshly cut. A white Lexus SUV sat in the driveway, the current model, not more than a year old. Nice house, Frank said, lifting the camera. I helped with the down payment 3 years ago, I said quietly. $15,000 on top of the annual $50,000. Frank made a note, but said nothing. That is a $70,000 car, he said a moment later, adjusting the telephoto lens. What does Lisa do for work? I opened my mouth and realized I did not know. Lisa had worked at a marketing firm when Daniel was alive. After the funeral, she said she had quit to focus on Oliver. I had assumed the $50,000 a year was covering everything. I had never asked if she had gone back to work. Never asked where the money went. Never asked anything at all. I do not know, I said. Frank tapped his pen twice. Day 1 passed without incident. Lisa left at 8:15 in the Lexus, dropped Oliver at school, then drove to a shopping center on Broughton Street. She came out 2 hours later carrying bags from stores I could not afford to walk into. Had lunch alone at a restaurant with cloth napkins and a valet. Picked Oliver up at 3. Went home. Did not come back out. Day 2 followed the same pattern. Lisa left, dropped Oliver, shopped, lunched, picked up Oliver, went home. A woman living comfortably. More than comfortably. Living well on $50,000 a year that was supposed to be for a 6-year-old child. She is not struggling, Frank said, lowering the camera at the end of day 2. Whatever that money is paying for, it is not survival. Day 3 changed everything. It was a Wednesday afternoon. Lisa had dropped Oliver at school and driven home. We expected the usual routine. Shopping, lunch, pickup. Instead, she stayed home. At 1:15, a black pickup truck pulled into the driveway. A man got out, mid-30s. Athletic build. Dark hair, clean cut. He wore a polo shirt and khakis, the kind of casual that cost money. He walked to the front door and did not knock, did not ring the bell. He pulled out a key, unlocked the door, and walked inside like he owned the place. Frank raised the camera. The shutter clicked rapidly. "He has a key," he said. "That is not a delivery man." "Who is he?" "That is what we find out." Frank zoomed in on the truck's license plate and wrote it down. The man stayed for 3 hours. Through the telephoto lens, we could see glimpses through the front window. Lisa, and the man on the couch, him leaning close, her laughing, his hand on her knee, her hand on his chest. Comfortable. Familiar. The body language of two people who had been together for a long time. When the man finally left, Lisa walked him to the driveway. They stood beside his truck talking. She touched his arm the same way I had seen her touch the man at the bakery. Brief, easy, intimate. Then he drove away, and Lisa went inside. "Got the plate," Frank said. "I will run it tonight." He called me at 9 that evening. The truck is registered to a Derek Payne, 35 years old. Address in Pooler, just outside Savannah. Derek Payne. The name hit me like cold water. He was Daniel's colleague. They taught at the same music school before Daniel opened his own studio. Frank was silent for a moment. "Lisa's in a relationship with your son's former colleague. Has been for a while, based on how comfortable they looked. And she has never mentioned him to you?" "Never. Not once." "Interesting." I heard his pen scratching. We keep watching. Day 4. Derek came back. Same time. Same routine. Key, door, 3 hours. Driveway. Goodbye. Day 5. Something different. Lisa did not stay home after dropping Oliver at school. She drove south, past the historic district, past the neighborhoods I knew, into the industrial area on the south side of Savannah. Warehouses, loading docks, chain-link fences. Frank started the engine. "Let us see where she goes." We followed at a distance, Frank's gray Ford blending into the traffic. Lisa turned onto Industrial Boulevard, then onto a narrower road lined with old brick buildings. She pulled into a small parking lot beside a squat warehouse, with narrow windows and a faded sign that read, Warehouse Row. Building 12. She parked near a side entrance, got out, unlocked the door with a key, and went inside. Frank stopped across the street behind a delivery van. We waited. 45 minutes passed. Lisa came out, locked the door behind her, got in the Lexus, and drove away like nothing had happened. "What is this place?" I asked. Frank searched on his phone. Warehouse Row. Mixed-use commercial. Storage units, small workshops, a few artist studios. He looked up at the building. Narrow windows. Quiet. Almost abandoned looking. Why would Lisa need a warehouse? I stared at Building 12. The brick was old and dark. One window on the second floor had a curtain drawn across it. The only sign that someone used the space for anything at all. 45 minutes. Lisa had spent 45 minutes inside and left without carrying anything in or out. "There is something in there," I said. Frank nodded slowly. Wrote the address in his notebook. Circled it twice. "Yeah," he said. "And we are going to find out what it is." The drive home was quiet. Frank dropped me at the bakery and said he would be back in the morning. I stood on the sidewalk watching his Ford disappear down Bull Street. Then looked up at my apartment window, the faint glow of the lamp I had left on, the shadow of the mantel where the urn sat. Building 12. Warehouse Row. Lisa had a key. Derek had a key to her house. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, my grandson was begging me to stop sending money. Oliver's voice, small and steady. "Watch her, Grandma. You will see." I was watching. And the picture was getting darker with every passing day. Some truths do not wait for you to find them. They find you in the quietest moments, when your guard is down and your hands are shaking and the house is so silent you can hear your own heartbeat. It was a Thursday night. Almost 11. I should have been asleep. I had to be up at 3 for the bakery. Same as always. But sleep had become a stranger since Oliver's warning at the park. Every night I lay in bed replaying everything. The piano. The vanilla. Derek's key. Building 12. The pieces circled like birds that would not land. I got up and went to the kitchen for water. The apartment was dark, except for the streetlight filtering through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. On my way back through the living room, I stopped at the mantel. The urn sat where it always sat, beside Daniel's recital photo. Brass. Cold. The size of a shoebox. I had passed it 10,000 times in 5 years. Touched it. Talked to it. Cried beside it. Tonight I just stood there, looking at it. My right hand was aching, the arthritis flaring the way it did when the weather changed. I reached up to the shelf above the mantel where I kept my pain medication. The anti-inflammatory the doctor had prescribed. The bottle was pushed to the back. I stretched, fingers straining, and my elbow caught the urn. It happened in slow motion. The brass box tilted, teetered on the edge of the mantel for one impossible second, and then fell. It hit the hardwood floor with a sound that rang through the apartment like a church bell. The lid, threaded on with a simple screw cap, popped off on impact and rolled across the floor, spinning in a tight circle before clattering to a stop against the baseboard, and the contents spilled out. I dropped to my knees. Not by choice. My legs simply gave out. Brown powder spread across the dark hardwood in a wide arc. I stared at it, heart hammering, hands hovering above the mess. My son was on the floor. I had to gather him up. Had to put him back. Had to fix this. I scooped a handful of the powder and brought it close. My hands were shaking so badly that some of it sifted through my fingers and fell back to the floor. I looked at it under the streetlight coming through the window. The powder was coarse, not fine the way I had imagined cremated remains would be. Grainy, uneven, dark brown in some places, lighter in others. Then I smelled it. Not the sterile, nothing of ash. Not the faint mineral scent I had read about in articles I could never finish. This was something else entirely. Something warm. Something sweet. Something I had smelled every single morning for 35 years. Vanilla. My stomach turned. I brought the powder closer to my face, inhaling deeper. Yes. Vanilla. Rich and unmistakable. And underneath it, woven through like a thread, something spicy and warm. Cinnamon. And beneath both, the base note, the foundation of the entire mixture, a smell so familiar, I could have identified it blindfolded in a room full of 1,000 scents. Coffee. Ground coffee. I let the powder fall from my hands, stared at the pile on the floor, reached into it again, this time, deliberately, searching, sifting through with my fingers the way I sifted flour at the bakery every morning, looking for bone fragments, looking for the calcium deposits, they said, remained after cremation. Looking for anything at all, that proved my son was in this powder. Nothing. Just coffee grounds, vanilla powder, cinnamon, the same ingredients I measured out before dawn, every morning at Caldwell's Bakery, the same ingredients that sat in jars on my kitchen shelf, 10 feet from where I was kneeling. Someone had filled my son's urn with baking ingredients. The realization did not arrive gently. It crashed through me like a wave through a seawall, destroying everything in its path. I swept my arm across the floor, sending the powder scattering. The empty urn lay on its side near the baseboard, mouth open, hollow. I picked it up and shook it. Nothing inside. Nothing left. Just brass and air. No. The word came out as a whisper, then louder. No. Then I was shouting, "No! No, no!" I hurled the urn across the room. It hit the opposite wall and bounced off with a clang that echoed through the apartment. Hollow and mocking. The sound of an empty thing pretending to be full. It landed on the carpet and rolled to a stop. The lid somewhere across the room, the powder scattered everywhere. For 5 years, Henry had kissed this urn every night, had pressed his lips to the cold brass and whispered, "Good night, son." Had sat in his armchair for hours staring at it, stroking it with his carpenter's thumb. Had died 8 months later believing that our boy's remains rested above our fireplace. And it was coffee grounds and vanilla and cinnamon. Kitchen scraps in a brass box. Baking ingredients from a grocery store shelf. The things I used every morning to make pastries for strangers. My husband died grieving over the contents of a spice cabinet. The rage came so fast and so hard that I could not breathe. I braced my hands on the floor, kneeling in the scattered powder, gasping. The apartment smelled like a bakery. My son's urn smelled like my own shop, like someone had walked into Caldwell's, scooped ingredients off my shelf, and poured them into a brass box and handed it to me and said, "Here. This is your son. Mourn this." My phone was in my hand before I knew I had picked it up. I pulled up Frank's contact and called. He answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep. "Margaret, it is almost midnight. The urn, Frank." My voice was shaking so hard I barely recognized it. "The urn is fake." Silence. Then, more alert. "What do you mean fake?" I opened it. It fell. "Frank, it is not Daniel. It is coffee grounds and vanilla and cinnamon. Baking ingredients. Someone put baking ingredients in my son's urn." I heard rustling, a light clicking on. "You are sure? I am looking at it right now." Spread across my living room floor. "It smells like my bakery, Frank. It smells exactly like my bakery. Margaret, listen to me." His voice shifted. Calm. Steady. The journalist voice. "Do not touch anything else. Do not clean it up. I am coming over right now. They lied to us." The words felt like broken glass in my throat. The funeral. The body. Lisa identified someone who was not Daniel. They gave us kitchen scraps in a brass box, and we mourned for 5 years. I am 10 minutes away. Stay there. Do not call Lisa. Do not call anyone. The line went dead. I knelt on my living room floor, surrounded by coffee and vanilla and cinnamon, staring at the empty urn lying on its side against the wall. The apartment was silent, except for my ragged breathing and the hum of the bakery refrigerators through the wall. For 5 years, they told me my son was dead. They gave me this urn and told me it held his remains. Henry believed them. I believed them. We mourned. We broke. Henry died. And it was a lie. All of it. A lie that smelled like the bakery I had built with my own hands. If the urn was fake, then what was in the casket? That question burned through every other thought in my head as Frank sat at my kitchen table at 1:30 in the morning, photographing the scattered powder on the living room floor with his phone, scooping samples into plastic bags he had brought from home, and scribbling notes into his notebook with the focused intensity of a man who had just found the first crack in a wall he intended to tear down. He stayed until nearly 3. Documented everything. The powder. The empty urn. The lid. The location where each piece had landed. He treated my living room like a crime scene. Because that is what it was. "The urn changes everything," he said before leaving. "If the remains are fake, then the cremation was fake. If the cremation was fake, then either there was no body, or the body was not Daniel's." He paused at the door. "I need to look at the fire report." "How? I still have contacts." He said it the way retired journalists say it, like the word contacts covered a network of favors built over 30 years. "Get some sleep, Margaret." I did not sleep. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, then went downstairs and baked bread, because that was all I knew how to do when the world stopped making sense. Frank called the next evening. I found something. He came to the bakery after closing. Laptop open on the counter. Reading glasses on. Notebook beside him. He had spent the day pulling strings, calling in favors, talking to sources he would not name. "The fire report from Daniel's studio," he began. "Official cause was accidental. Candle left burning near fabric. Building fully engulfed by the time crews arrived. One body recovered, badly burned, identified through dental records. That is what they told us. Here is what they did not tell you. Frank turned the laptop toward me. The dental records used to identify Daniel were provided by Lisa. She told the medical examiner she had a copy of Daniel's dental file from his last appointment. The examiner accepted them without independent verification. Is that normal? No. Frank's voice was flat. Standard procedure requires records obtained directly from the dentist's office. Having a family member provide them is irregular. It happens, especially when there is pressure to close a case quickly. But it is a red flag. He scrolled down. Second issue. No DNA confirmation. The body was too badly damaged, they said. But in a case like this, with a fire that intense, DNA testing is standard protocol even when difficult. They skipped it. Why would they skip it? Because someone wanted the identification closed quickly and quietly. Frank tapped the screen. Third issue. The responding fire crew that night included a Travis Payne, firefighter, 3 years on the job at the time. The name landed like a punch. Payne. Like Derek Payne. His younger brother. Frank looked at me over his glasses. Derek Payne, Lisa's boyfriend, has a brother who was on the crew that responded to your son's studio fire. The same crew that recovered the body. The same fire where the dental records were provided by Lisa and the DNA was never tested. The bakery was silent. The ovens had cooled. The lights hummed. I stared at Frank's laptop screen, at the fire report and the names and the dates, and felt the floor shifting beneath me. What are you saying, Frank? I am saying there are enough irregularities in this case to warrant a much closer look. He closed the laptop. And I am saying we need to find out what is inside. Building 12. He had already started. The day before, while I was baking, Frank had driven to Warehouse Row and placed a small camera across the street from Building 12. Wireless, motion-activated, transmitting to an app on his phone. Legal for private investigation purposes, he assured me. We watch the feed, he said. See who comes and goes. If Lisa is visiting regularly, someone or something is in there. 3 days passed. 3 days of checking Frank's phone between customers, between batches of sourdough, between the moments when the bakery was quiet enough for me to think. Day 1. Nothing. The camera captured Lisa arriving at 2:15, entering with her key, leaving 40 minutes later. Day 2. Lisa again. Same time. Same pattern. 45 minutes inside. Day 3. No Lisa. But at 11 in the morning, the camera captured movement through the narrow second-floor window. A shadow. Then, more than a shadow. A figure. Sitting at what appeared to be a piano. The camera was across the street, the angle difficult. But Frank enhanced the image on his laptop that evening. Come here, he said. His voice was different. Careful. The way you speak when you are about to change someone's life. I walked around the counter and looked at his screen. He had pulled a still frame from the camera footage and enlarged it. The image was grainy, but clear enough. A man sitting at a piano, in a room with bare walls. Thin. Dark hair longer than it should have been. Head tilted slightly to the left as he played. Beside that image, Frank had placed a photograph of Daniel from 5 years ago. His last family photo, taken 3 months before the fire. Smiling, healthy, full of life. The man in the warehouse was thinner, older. The hair was different, but the jawline, the cheekbones, the way he tilted his head when he played, leaning slightly left, the same tilt I had watched for 20 years every time Daniel sat down at a piano. I ran the image through facial recognition software. Frank said quietly. Compared it to Daniel's driver's license photo. From 5 years ago. 2 images appeared side by side on the screen. Daniel's license photo on the left. The still frame from Building 12 on the right. 97% match. The room tilted. I grabbed the counter to steady myself. The flour-dusted surface was solid under my palms, real, in a way nothing else felt real anymore. Margaret. Frank's voice came from far away. That is, Daniel, your son is alive. My son was alive. The words entered my brain but could not find a place to land. They bounced around like echoes in an empty room, meaningless and enormous at the same time. For 5 years, I had mourned him, had stood at his grave, that empty grave, with its headstone and its lies, and talked to him like he could hear me. For 5 years, his urn had sat on my mantel, and I had believed it held his ashes. Henry had believed it. Henry had died believing it, and Daniel was alive. Sitting at a piano in a warehouse on the south side of Savannah, playing music behind narrow windows, in a building that Lisa visited 3 times a week, the grief came first. Not relief, not joy. Grief. Crushing and absolute. Grief for 5 stolen years. 5 years Henry and I could have had with our son. 5 years Oliver could have known his father. 5 years of arthritic hands and 3 o'clock mornings and $50,000 checks, written to a woman who had lied about everything. Then the rage. He is alive, I whispered. And they kept him there. They kept my son in a warehouse while his father died, and I paid them $250,000. Frank were telling on my shoulder. Steady. Firm. We do not know the full story yet. I know enough. Margaret. He turned me to face him. Your son has been in that building for 5 years. If we rush in without understanding why, we could make things worse. We need to know what they told him, what they are holding over him. Why he stayed. The words stopped me. Why he stayed. Daniel was alive. He was in Savannah. He was a mile from my bakery, and he had not come home in 5 years. What could they possibly have told him? I said slowly. That would make him stay in that warehouse for 5 years. Frank looked at me. His journalist eyes, sharp and steady. That is exactly what we need to find out. I could not wait. Frank wanted to plan, wanted to observe more, gather evidence, approach carefully. But how do you go home and sleep when your son, the son you buried 5 years ago, the son your husband died grieving, is alive in a warehouse, a mile from your bakery? You do not. You get in your car at 9 o'clock at night, and you drive. The streets of Savannah were quiet. Spanish moss hung motionless under the streetlights, and the old buildings stood like silent witnesses along every block. I drove south past the historic district, past the squares and churches and tourist restaurants, into the industrial area where the road narrowed and the buildings turned to brick and steel. Warehouse Row. Building 12. I pulled into the parking lot and killed the engine. One light glowed in the second-floor window. The same window I had watched on Frank's camera feed. My son was behind that glass. A gray Ford was already parked across the street. Frank stepped out as I opened my door. Figured you would come, he said. He was not smiling. Could not sleep either? No. If we do this, we do it my way. His voice was firm. We go in. We stay calm. We listen. No matter what he says, Margaret. We listen first. I nodded. My hands were shaking. Not arthritis. Something else entirely. The side door was unlocked. Frank pushed it open and we stepped inside. The warehouse was larger than I expected. Cold. The kind of cold that settles into old concrete and never leaves. High ceilings disappeared into darkness. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with boxes and industrial debris. But in the back corner, past all of it, someone had made a home. A twin bed with blankets that looked like they had not been washed in weeks. A card table with a hot plate. Instant coffee. Plastic utensils. Clothes hanging on a wire strung between 2 posts. One folding chair. One battery-powered lamp throwing weak yellow light across the concrete floor. And a piano. An old upright, scratched and worn, pushed against the far wall. Above the bed, taped to the concrete wall, were photographs. Oliver. Every single one of them. School pictures. Birthday photos. The snapshot from Forsyth Park, where he had lost his front tooth. Every photograph I had ever sent Lisa over the years was here. On this wall. In this warehouse. She had been showing them to Daniel. Keeping him connected to his son through pictures taped to a cold wall while she spent my money and lived with another man. Daniel was sitting on the bed, staring at those photographs. When the door creaked, he looked up. 5 years. 5 years since I had seen that face. He looked nothing like the man I remembered. Thin, dangerously thin. The kind of thin that comes from not eating enough for a long time. His hair was longer, darker, pulled back loosely. Dark circles carved shadows beneath his eyes. His clothes, a faded t-shirt and jeans that did not fit, hung off his frame like they belonged to someone else. And his hands, I looked at his hands, the hands that had played Chopin at 12, that had taught children to love music. And they were trembling. Mom? Just that one word. Barely a whisper. Something inside me broke open. Not gently, violently. 5 years of grief and rage and unanswered questions poured out before I could stop them. How could you? It came out louder than I meant. Harsher. Daniel flinched backward on the bed. How could you do this to us? Mom, I can explain. Explain? I stepped closer. My voice was rising and I could not control it. Your father died, Daniel. Your father. He sat in his armchair for 8 months, kissing a brass urn full of coffee grounds and vanilla, and then he died because his heart could not carry the grief anymore. Do you understand that? Daniel's face crumpled. Dad is gone. The question hit me like a physical blow. He did not know. Lisa had never told him. 8 months after your funeral. My voice cracked. He had a stroke in his workshop. I found him holding your photograph. Daniel made a sound I had never heard before. Not a word. Not a cry. Something deeper. Something animal. He folded forward on the bed, hands gripping his knees, and shook. I did not know. He whispered. She never told me. Lisa said you and Dad were fine. She said you were both okay. We were not okay. I was crying now. Could not stop. I baked bread at 3 a.m. for 5 years with hands that barely work, sent your wife $50,000 every January, and you were here. You were here the whole time. I had to stay, Mom. I had no choice. No choice? The words were acid. You had a son. You had a father. You had me. What choice could possibly be worse than this? Daniel looked up at me. His eyes were red, hollow, and full of something I had not expected. Not defiance, not anger. Guilt. Deep, crushing guilt that had been eating him alive for 5 years. I killed someone, Mom. The warehouse went silent. Even Frank, standing behind me, stopped moving. What? The fire. Daniel's voice was barely audible. It was my fault. I left a candle burning near the curtain. I was closing up, and Sophie was still inside. Sophie Miller. She was 15. She had her piano lesson that evening, and she was waiting for her mom to pick her up. He pressed his hands against his eyes. I smelled the smoke and ran out. By the time I turned around, the studio was burning. I tried to go back in, but the door, the heat, I could not. His voice broke. Lisa came. She had been picking up dinner nearby. She saw the fire and called Derek. He came fast. And when the building collapsed, Lisa told me Sophie was still inside. That she did not make it. I could not breathe. Lisa said I would go to prison. Daniel continued, each word costing him something. She said Sophie's family would press charges. Negligent homicide. She said I would lose Oliver. Lose you and Dad. Lose everything. Derek said he knew a way to make it all go away. If I disappeared, if everyone thought I was dead, no one would connect me to what happened to Sophie. So you agreed, I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. I had just killed a child, Mom. He looked at me with those destroyed eyes. A 15-year-old girl who trusted me. She sat at my piano every Thursday and played scales and laughed when she hit the wrong notes. And I killed her because I forgot to blow out a candle. Silence. The battery lamp flickered. The warehouse felt like a tomb. Frank, who had not spoken since we entered, stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but precise. Every word measured. Daniel, I need to ask you something. Daniel looked at him. Barely registered who he was. When the fire started, when you ran out of the building, did you actually see Sophie inside? Did you see what happened to her with your own eyes? Daniel blinked. What? Did you personally witness Sophie Miller in the building after the fire started? I know. I ran out. Lisa was outside. She told me Sophie was still in there. Derek confirmed it later. He said the crew found. Lisa told you, Frank repeated. And Derek confirmed it. Yes, but you did not see it yourself. Daniel stared at Frank. Then at me. Something shifted behind his eyes, like a crack forming in glass. No, he whispered. I did not see it myself. Frank looked at me. Then back at Daniel. I need you both to hear what I am about to say, very carefully. Frank did not sit down. He stood in the middle of that warehouse, under the single fluorescent tube that buzzed like a dying insect, and he looked at Daniel the way I had seen him look at a source who was about to hear something that would change everything. He held his black notebook open to a page I could not read, and he spoke in a voice so calm it almost sounded cruel. Daniel, I need you to walk me through the night of the fire one more time, every detail. Start with the candle. Daniel was sitting on the edge of the folding bed, his hands pressed between his knees, his shoulders drawn forward like a man bracing for a blow. He spoke slowly. He said he had been giving Sophie Miller, a 15-year-old student, a private piano lesson in his studio on East Broad Street. The lesson ended at 8:45 in the evening. Sophie left through the front door. Daniel stayed behind to finish some sheet music. He lit a candle on the shelf beside the piano, because the overhead light had been flickering for a week, and he had never called the landlord to fix it. He fell asleep at the bench. He woke to smoke and heat, stumbled out the back door into the alley, and called Lisa from a payphone 2 blocks away. Lisa arrived in 11 minutes. She told Daniel that the fire department had found a body inside. She said it was Sophie. She said Sophie must have come back through the front door after Daniel fell asleep, and that the candle had caught the curtain and trapped her. Derek arrived 17 minutes later in his black pickup. He confirmed everything Lisa said. He told Daniel that if the police investigated, Daniel would be charged with involuntary manslaughter, negligent homicide, and child endangerment because Sophie was a minor. Derek said the sentence could be 15 to 20 years. He said the only option was to disappear. Frank let the silence hold for a full 5 seconds after Daniel finished. Then he closed his notebook, slid it into his jacket pocket, and pulled out his phone. He set it on the piano lid, face up, and tapped the screen twice. Daniel, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to every word before you react. Frank paused. Sophie Miller is alive. Daniel did not move. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His fingers curled into the thin mattress beneath him. Frank continued. He said he had spent 2 days pulling records after he found the red flags in the fire report. Sophie Miller was now 20 years old. She was a sophomore at the Savannah College of Art and Design, enrolled in the music program, and she had made the dean's list the previous semester. The fire had burned her left hand, but the injury healed in 2 weeks. She had never been inside the studio when the fire spread. She had walked home, heard about the fire the next morning on the news, and went to the hospital on her own for the burn she had gotten reaching for the door handle when she realized she had left her notebook inside. She was treated and released the same day. She is alive, Daniel. She has been alive for 5 years. She plays piano at a recital hall on Bull Street every Thursday evening. I have her phone number. I watched my son's face collapse. It did not happen all at once. First his jaw tightened, then his eyes filled, then his chest caved inward, as though someone had pulled a thread that held his entire body together. He pressed both hands over his mouth and bent forward until his forehead nearly touched his knees. Frank picked up the phone and held it out to me. Margaret, I think this call should come from you. My hands were shaking so badly I had to use both thumbs to tap the number. The phone rang 3 times. A young woman answered with a voice that sounded like morning, bright and unhurried. Hello? Sophie. My name is Margaret Caldwell. I am Daniel Caldwell's mother. There was a pause. Then recognition. Oh my God. Mrs. Caldwell. I remember you. You came to the spring recital. Is Daniel okay? I haven't seen him since the fire. I always wondered what happened to him. I pressed the speaker icon and held the phone between us. Daniel stared at it as though it were a living thing. Sophie. Daniel is here with me. He is listening. Mr. Caldwell? Her voice softened. Are you there? I want you to know. My hand healed completely. I still play every day. I am studying music at SCAD. You were the best teacher I ever had. Daniel tried to speak. The first attempt produced nothing. The second attempt broke into a sound I had never heard from him before. Something between a gasp and a groan. Raw and gutted, and 5 years too late. He covered his face with both hands and wept the way a man weeps when he realizes he has been buried alive for no reason at all. Sophie kept talking, gently, filling the silence with facts that felt like oxygen. She said her left hand was fine. She said she still played the Chopin nocturne he had taught her. She said she graduated from high school 2 years ago and got a scholarship. She said she always told people that Daniel Caldwell was the reason she became a musician. I knelt beside my son on the concrete floor and pulled him against me. His body shook so hard, I could feel his heartbeat through his back. He kept repeating the same words, over and over, pressing them into my shoulder like a confession. Lisa told me she was dead. Derek confirmed it. They said I killed her. Dad died because of their lie. 5 years, Mom. 5 years. Frank stood by the door, arms crossed, watching us. He waited until Daniel's breathing slowed. Then he spoke one more time. The fire was real. The candle was real. But the death, the funeral, the urn, the cremation, the 5 years in this warehouse, all of it was a stage. Lisa built it. Derek enforced it. Travis helped cover the fire report. And now we know the only question that matters. He looked at Daniel, then at me. They kept you here for 5 years, terrified of a crime that never happened. They took $250,000 from your mother. They let your father die of grief. Frank uncrossed his arms and reached for the door handle. The question is why? And I think we already know the answer. The fluorescent light above us flickered twice. Daniel lifted his head from my shoulder and stared at the phone still lying on the piano lid. The call still connected. Sophie's breathing still faintly audible on the other end. She is alive, he whispered. She has been alive this whole time. I held him tighter and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that his 5 stolen years had not already screamed. Frank did not come back to the warehouse. He told me to take Daniel home, feed him, let him sleep in a real bed for the first time in 5 years, and wait. He said he needed 48 hours. He said what he was about to do required silence, patience, and a printer with a lot of ink. I brought Daniel to my apartment behind the bakery on Bull Street. He stood in the doorway for almost a full minute, staring at the narrow hallway, the kitchen light, the small table where I ate my meals alone. He touched the wall with his fingertips as though he were testing whether it was real. I led him to the spare bedroom, the one I had kept exactly as it was when he used to visit on Sundays before the fire. Clean sheets, a reading lamp, a glass of water on the nightstand. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at me with eyes that had not seen a proper room in 1,826 days. "Sleep," I said. "We will talk tomorrow." He slept for 14 hours. I did not sleep at all. I sat in the kitchen with my hands around a cup of coffee that went cold 3 times, and I listened to the silence of my apartment, which for the first time in 5 years contained 2 living heartbeats instead of 1. Frank arrived on a Thursday evening at 6:15. He carried a black canvas bag over his shoulder, the kind reporters used to carry when newspapers still mattered. He set it on my kitchen table, unzipped it, and pulled out a stack of documents, nearly 2 inches thick. He arranged them in 5 separate piles, each held together with a binder clip, and he placed his black notebook open beside them. "Margaret, Daniel, sit down. This is going to take a while." He started with the first pile. Bank records. He had traced every dollar of the $250,000 I had sent to Lisa over 5 years. The transfers went from my account at Savannah First National to Lisa's joint checking account, which she shared with Derek Payne. Not a savings account for Oliver. Not a trust fund. A joint checking account with a man she was not married to, opened 3 months before the fire. 3 months before, Frank repeated, tapping the date on the account statement. She opened this account with Derek in February. The fire happened in May. She was planning this before your son ever lit that candle. The second pile. Spending records. Frank had obtained transaction histories through a source he would not name. Someone at the bank who owed him a favor from his reporting days. Over 5 years, Lisa and Derek had spent $162,000 on personal expenses. A white Lexus SUV, $41,000. Renovations to the colonial house on Abercorn Street, $38,000. Clothing, restaurants, vacations to Miami and Key West, $47,000. Jewelry, electronics, furniture, $36,000. None of it had anything to do with Oliver. Not a single transaction for school tuition, medical bills, childcare, clothing for a growing boy, or any expense that could reasonably be connected to raising a 6-year-old child. Your grandson has been wearing the same brand of shoes from a discount store for 3 years, Frank said. I checked. Lisa buys him 2 pairs a year, $60 total. That is what Oliver gets from $250,000. Daniel's hands were flat on the table. His jaw was locked. I could see the veins in his forearms pressing against the skin. The third pile. Offshore transfers. This was the part Frank said had taken him the longest. Of the $250,000, $88,000 had been moved in small increments, never more than $4,000 at a time, to an account at a bank in Nassau, Bahamas. The account was registered under a company called Coastal Property Holdings LLC, incorporated in Delaware, with no physical address and no employees. The company's registered agent was Derek Payne. Frank said the transfers had been structured deliberately below the federal reporting threshold of $10,000 to avoid triggering a suspicious activity report with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. That is called structuring, Frank said. It is a federal crime. Separate from the fraud. Separate from the kidnapping. Separate from everything else. This alone carries up to 5 years. The fourth pile. Communication records. Frank had pulled metadata from Lisa's phone through a method he described only as creative public records work. Over the past 5 years, Lisa had exchanged over 4,000 text messages with Derek. Frank had not read the content, but the pattern was clear. The messages spiked every November. The same month Lisa asked me for early payment, and again every January. The same month I sent the wire. There were also 212 calls between Lisa and Travis Payne, Derek's younger brother, the firefighter who had responded to the studio that night. The calls started 3 days before the fire and continued at a steady pace for 5 years. Travis did not just happen to be on the crew that night, Frank said. He was placed there. He made sure the identification relied on dental records supplied by Lisa. He made sure no DNA test was ordered. He made sure the file was closed quickly and quietly. The fifth pile was the thinnest. A single sheet of paper. Frank turned it toward us. It was a printout of a real estate listing for a 4-bedroom house on Tybee Island, listed at $310,000. The prospective buyers were listed as Derek Payne and Lisa Monroe. Not Lisa Monroe Caldwell. She had already dropped my son's name. This is what the money was for, Frank said. A new house, a new life, a new name. You were supposed to keep sending checks until they had enough to disappear. Oliver was the bait. Your grief was the fuel. And Daniel in that warehouse was the insurance policy. Because as long as he believed he had killed a girl, he would never come out. Never talk. Never call anyone. Daniel stood up so fast his chair hit the wall behind him. He walked to the window and pressed his forehead against the glass. His breath fogged the pain in short, hard bursts. He did not speak. He did not need to. I had known my son for 35 years, and I had never seen rage take the shape it was taking now. Silent. Still. And absolute. Frank gathered the 5 piles back together and placed them in the canvas bag. He zipped it shut and looked at me. We have the money trail, the offshore account, the structuring, the phone records, and the real estate listing. We have Sophie alive and Daniel's testimony. We have everything we need. He paused. But if we go to the police right now, Lisa and Derek will lawyer up, deny everything, and it becomes your word against theirs. The bank records are strong, but a good defense attorney will argue Lisa had every right to spend money given to her freely. He leaned forward and lowered his voice. We need a confession. On tape. From Lisa, from Derek, or from both. And I know exactly how to get it. Daniel turned from the window. His eyes were dry. His voice, when it finally came, was steady and cold, and nothing like the broken man who had wept on a warehouse floor 2 days before. Tell me what to do. Frank opened his notebook to a fresh page and picked up his pen. Tomorrow night. 7 o'clock. Building 12. Frank spread a hand-drawn map of Building 12 across my kitchen table the next morning. He had sketched it on a sheet of butcher paper from the bakery, the kind I used to wrap loaves of sourdough. And the faint smell of flour rose from the page as he smoothed the corners flat. The map showed 2 floors, a main entrance on the south side, a loading dock on the east, a fire escape on the north wall, and a narrow service door on the west that opened into an alley. He had marked each one with a small X and written the distances between them in steps, not feet, because Frank said steps were what mattered when you were moving fast in the dark. The plan is simple, Frank said. Simple plans survive contact with reality. Complicated plans do not. He pointed to the second floor, the room where Daniel had been kept for 5 years. The piano was still there. The folding bed. The taped photographs of Oliver. The single fluorescent light. Frank said we would use that room because Lisa and Derek already associated it with control. It was the place where they had kept their secret. It would feel safe to them, and people confess in places where they feel safe. Daniel would make the call. He would phone Lisa and tell her that he was done hiding, that he wanted out, that he needed to see her and Derek at Building 12 at 7 o'clock that evening to discuss his terms. Frank said the word terms was critical. It implied negotiation, not confrontation. It suggested Daniel wanted something. Money, freedom, a new identity. And that would draw Lisa and Derek in because they would believe they could still manage him. They have managed him for 5 years, Frank said. They will believe they can manage him for one more night. The wire was not a wire in the way movies show it. Frank pulled a small device from his canvas bag, no larger than a book of matches. It was a digital voice recorder, matte black, with a built-in microphone sensitive enough to pick up a whisper from across a room. Frank said he had used one like it during his years at the Savannah Morning News, when he recorded interviews with sources who did not want to be seen entering a newsroom. He taped it to Daniel's chest with medical adhesive, just below the collarbone, underneath his shirt. He pressed the record button, spoke a test sentence, played it back. The audio was clean. Every consonant, every breath, every pause between words. "You do not need to shout," Frank told Daniel. "You do not need to accuse. You ask questions. Short questions. Let them fill the silence." People who have been lying for 5 years are desperate to explain themselves because the lie has been sitting on their chest like a stone, and when someone finally asks, they will lift it off just to breathe. Frank rehearsed the questions with Daniel for 2 hours at my kitchen table. He wrote each one on an index card in block letters and laid them out in sequence, like a hand of cards. Card 1. Lisa. Who was in the studio the night of the fire? Card 2. Derek. Whose idea was it to tell me Sophie was dead? Card 3. Where did the money go? All $250,000. Card 4. What about the urn? Who filled it? Card 5. What were you going to do when the money stopped? Frank said the order mattered. The first 2 questions established the conspiracy. The third followed the money. The fourth attacked the most personal detail. The urn, because it would provoke emotion, and emotional people say things they cannot take back. The fifth was the closing, the question that revealed the endgame, and forced Lisa and Derek to admit they had a plan beyond the fraud. If they answer even 3 of these 5 questions honestly, we have enough for the police to build a case that no defense attorney can dismantle. Daniel read the cards 3 times. He held each one between his fingers and mouthed the words silently. Then he set them down and looked at Frank. What if they do not come? They will come. You are their investment. You are the reason the money keeps flowing. If you threaten to walk, they lose everything. The house on Tybee Island, the offshore account, the life they built on your mother's grief. They will come because they cannot afford not to. Frank then turned to me. He said I would not be in the room. I would be outside. In his gray Ford, parked in the alley beside the west service door, with the engine running and a phone connected to Detective Ray Castillo of the Savannah-Chatham Metropolitan Police Department. Frank had called Castillo that morning and briefed him on everything. The fire, the false identification, Travis Payne's role on the fire crew, the offshore transfers, the structuring, the urn. Castillo had listened without interrupting for 22 minutes. At the end, he said 3 words. Get me the tape. Castillo will have 2 unmarked units on East Industrial Avenue, 1 at each end of the block, Frank said. They will not move until I give the signal. The signal is a single text message. 1 word. The word is now. I did not like the plan. I told Frank that sending my son, a man who had been imprisoned and manipulated for 5 years, into a room with the 2 people who had destroyed his life, was not simple. It was dangerous. Lisa was calculating. Derek was physical. And Daniel, for all the steadiness in his voice that morning, was still a man held together by stitches that had not yet set. Frank looked at me with the same expression he had worn the night he sat at my kitchen table and told me the money trail never lies. Patient, certain, unblinking. Margaret, your son survived 5 years in a concrete room with a folding bed and a piano. He survived believing he had killed a child. He survived losing his father without being allowed to grieve. He is the strongest person in this room. And tonight, he is going to prove it. Daniel reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His palm was rough and dry, the hand of a man who had not been cared for in a very long time. He squeezed once. I can do this, Mom. I looked at my son. I looked at the recorder taped beneath his shirt, the index cards lined up on my kitchen table, the butcher paper map with its small X marks and distances measured in steps. I looked at Frank's black notebook, open to a page where he had written a single word in capital letters and circled it twice. Now. I squeezed Daniel's hand back. I did not say be careful, because careful was not what the night required. I said the only thing that felt true. I will be right outside that door. Frank checked his watch. 11:14 in the morning. 7 hours and 46 minutes until 7 o'clock. Go rest, he said to Daniel. Eat something. Drink water. And when you walk into that room tonight, remember one thing. He tapped the index cards. You are not the prisoner anymore. You are the door. Daniel took the cards, folded them once, and slid them into his shirt pocket, right beside the recorder that was already silently waiting. The sun dropped behind the warehouses on East Industrial Avenue at 6:41 that evening, and the light that replaced it was the color of a bruise. Purple and yellow and fading fast. I sat in the passenger seat of Frank's gray Ford, parked in the narrow alley beside the west service door of Building 12. The engine was running. My phone was on my lap. Detective Ray Castillo's number already dialed and waiting for me to press the green button. Frank was in the back seat with a pair of binoculars and a second phone. He had already typed the message. One word. Now. His thumb hovered a quarter inch above the send button. Daniel left the car at 6:48. He wore a dark gray shirt buttoned to the collar, the recorder pressed flat against his chest beneath it, held by 2 strips of medical adhesive. The 5 index cards were in his left shirt pocket. He did not look back at me. He walked to the west service door, opened it with the key Frank had copied 3 days earlier, and disappeared inside. I counted his footsteps in my head. 14 steps down the ground floor corridor. A left turn. 22 steps to the staircase. 18 steps up to the second floor. Another left. 11 steps to the room at the end of the hall. Frank had walked the route that morning and counted everyone. At 6:53, my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. 2 words. I am here. At 6:57, a pair of headlights turned onto East Industrial Avenue from the south end. A black pickup truck. Derek Payne. He parked in the gravel lot on the east side, beside a dumpster. 30 seconds later, a white Lexus SUV appeared from the north end. Lisa. She parked beside the pickup, mirrors nearly touching. They got out at the same time. Derek in jeans and a black jacket. Lisa in a long gray coat and boots. They walked to the south entrance without speaking and entered the building at exactly 7 o'clock. I pressed the green button. Castillo answered before the first ring finished. Mrs. Caldwell. I am here. Unit 1 is at the south end of Industrial. Unit 2 is at the north. Do not enter the building for any reason. I understand, I said, though every nerve in my body was telling me to run inside. Frank leaned forward between the seats. Quiet now. Let Daniel work. The recorder was not transmitting live. We would not know what was said until Daniel came out. So I sat in that car and waited. 7 minutes passed. Then 12. Then 19. Frank checked his watch every 90 seconds. I counted 13 checks. At 7:23, the west service door opened. Not Daniel. Lisa. She came out fast, her gray coat flaring behind her, turned left into the alley, and stopped 6 feet from our car. She pressed her back against the brick wall, pulled out her phone, and called someone. Her voice was thin and high, and it carried through the closed windows. Travis, listen to me. He knows. Daniel knows about Sophie. He knows she is alive. Someone told him. He is asking about the urn, the money, everything, every dollar. A pause. I could not hear the reply. No, I am not going back in there. Derek can handle him. But you need to disappear. Get rid of the report. Get rid of everything. She ended the call and stood against the wall, breathing hard. Short, white clouds, despite the warm evening. I watched her through the glass, no more than 6 feet away, separated by a pane of glass and 5 years of lies. Frank's thumb moved. He pressed send. Now, within 40 seconds, I heard engines from both ends of East Industrial Avenue, accelerating hard. Headlights swept the alley. Lisa turned toward the light, and her face was not fear. It was recognition. The look of someone who realizes the ground beneath them has been hollow all along and has finally given way. 2 officers reached her before she could take a step. She gave them her hands without a word. The second unit entered through the south door. Frank stepped out and told me to stay. I did not stay. I crossed the alley and went through the west service door. The ground floor was dark except for light falling down the staircase. I climbed 18 steps, turned left, walked 11 steps to the open door at the end of the hall. Derek Payne was on his knees in the center of the room. Two officers held his shoulders while handcuffs clicked shut. His face was red and slick with sweat, and he repeated the same phrase without stopping. "I want a lawyer. I want a lawyer." Daniel stood beside the piano. His shirt was still buttoned to the collar. His hands hung at his sides. His face was calm. Impossibly calm. The face of a man who had just set down something he had carried for 1,826 days. He looked at me, and for the first time since I had found him in this room, he did not look like a prisoner. He looked like my son. Detective Castillo came up the stairs behind me. He was a broad man with a short gray beard and steady hands. He approached Daniel and asked if the recorder was still running. Daniel peeled the device from his chest and placed it in Castillo's palm. "Everything is on there," Daniel said. Lisa admitted she told me Sophie was dead to keep me hidden. Derek admitted the money went to their joint account and described the offshore transfers. He said the urn was filled with coffee grounds, vanilla powder, and cinnamon because those were the only things Lisa had in the kitchen the night they staged the funeral. Daniel paused. He laughed when he said it. Castillo turned the recorder over once in his hand and nodded. "Mrs. Caldwell, your son just handed me every conviction in this case." I walked across the room, past Derek on his knees, past the folding bed and the photographs of Oliver still taped to the wall, and I put my arms around Daniel. The piano beside us was silent. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Somewhere outside, Lisa was being placed in the back of a patrol car, and the alley where she had made her last phone call was already empty. Daniel pressed his forehead against the top of my head, the way he used to when he was 16 and already taller than me, and he whispered something only I could hear. "It is over, Mom." I held him tighter and felt, for the first time in 5 years, that the ground beneath me was solid. They put Derek in the back of the first patrol car and Lisa in the second. The two vehicles sat 30 feet apart in the gravel lot on the east side of Building 12, engines idling, red and blue lights turning slow circles against the warehouse walls. I stood beside Frank's Ford and watched the lights paint the brick in colors that did not belong there, colors that belonged to hospital corridors and highway accidents, and nights when the world breaks open and shows you what has been hiding underneath. Detective Castillo asked Daniel and me to ride to the Savannah-Chatham Metropolitan Police Station on Habersham Street. Frank followed in his own car. We arrived at 8:19. The building smelled like floor wax and burnt coffee, and the fluorescent lights in the hallway were the same sickly hum as the one in Daniel's warehouse room, as though the sound had followed us across the city. Castillo led us to an observation room with a one-way mirror that looked into interview room B. He told us we could watch, but could not enter. He set 2 bottles of water on the table and closed the door behind him. Through the glass, I watched him walk into the interview room, where Derek Payne sat handcuffed to a metal ring bolted to the table. Derek's black jacket had been removed. His arms were bare and his forearms were streaked with sweat. His lawyer had not arrived yet. Castillo read him his rights a second time, placed the digital recorder on the table between them, and pressed play. Derek's own voice filled the room. I heard it through the glass as clearly as if he were sitting beside me. The fire was real. The plan came after. Castillo stopped the recording and looked at Derek. He asked if Derek wanted to wait for his attorney. Derek stared at the recorder for 11 seconds. I counted. Then he shook his head. "It does not matter anymore," he said. "She is going to blame everything on me anyway." Castillo opened his notebook. Derek started talking. He said the plan began in February, 3 months before the fire at Daniel's studio on East Broad Street. Lisa had come to him with a problem. She and Daniel were broke. Daniel earned almost nothing from piano lessons. The bakery belonged to Margaret and Henry, and Daniel had no ownership stake. No inheritance promise. Nothing. Lisa wanted out of the marriage, but knew a divorce would leave her with nothing because there was nothing to divide. Derek said Lisa told him she had been watching Margaret for months, studying how the old woman handled money, how she ran the books at the bakery, how she kept a savings account that had grown slowly over 40 years of 6-day work weeks. The account held just over $300,000 at the time. Lisa said the only way to touch that money was through grief, Derek told Castillo. A dead son is worth more than a living one. The plan was built in layers. Lisa would stage Daniel's death in a fire. Derek's younger brother Travis, a firefighter with the Savannah Chatham Department, would make sure he was on the responding crew and would control the identification process. They needed a body, so they used an unclaimed cadaver from a medical supply company that Travis had a connection to through a friend at Memorial Health. The dental records Lisa provided to the coroner were fabricated. Travis made sure no DNA test was ever ordered. After the funeral, Lisa would keep Daniel alive but hidden. She told Daniel that Sophie Miller, his 15-year-old student, had died in the fire, and that he would be charged with her death if he surfaced. The lie kept Daniel obedient. The warehouse, Building 12, was leased under a shell company Derek had set up using a fake name. The rent was $400 a month, paid in cash, slid under the landlord's door on the first of every month for 5 years. Total rent paid, $24,000. We fed him, Derek said, and the casualness of the word made my stomach turn. Groceries, once a week. Lisa went on Tuesdays. Sometimes I went. He had a piano. He had a bed. He had photographs of his kid. He was fine. Castillo asked about the money. Derek leaned back in his chair and recited the numbers as though he were reading a bank statement. Margaret sent $50,000 every January. Lisa deposited each check into the joint account she shared with Derek. Of the $250,000 received over 5 years, $162,000 went to personal expenses. Derek listed them without hesitation. $41,000 for the white Lexus, $38,000 for the house renovation on Abercorn Street, $47,000 on travel, dining, and clothing, $36,000 on jewelry, electronics, and furniture. The remaining $88,000 was transferred in small amounts, always under $4,000, to an offshore account at a bank in Nassau, Bahamas, held by Coastal Property Holdings LLC, a shell company registered in Delaware with Derek as the sole agent. We were saving for a house on Tybee Island, Derek said. $310,000. We were almost there. Another 2 years of payments from the old woman, and we would have had enough. Castillo asked about Oliver. Derek shrugged. The kid was the hook. As long as Lisa had the kid, the grandmother would keep paying. We spent maybe $60 a year on him. Shoes. That is it. Everything else went to us. I felt Daniel's hand close around my wrist. His grip was so tight I could feel each finger individually, 5 points of pressure that I knew would leave marks. I did not pull away. I let him hold on because holding on was the only thing keeping him in that chair, instead of through that glass. Castillo asked one more question. Whose idea was it? Derek looked directly at the one-way mirror. He could not see us, but it felt as though he were staring into my eyes. Lisa's. Every piece of it. The fire, the body, the urn, the warehouse, the money. I built the machine, but she drew the blueprints. He paused. It was just business, detective. Nothing personal. Castillo closed his notebook, stopped the recording, and stood up. He walked out of the interview room and into our observation room. He looked at Daniel first, then at me. Lisa Monroe Caldwell is in interview room A. She has requested a lawyer and is not speaking. It does not matter. Between the recording from Building 12 and what Derek just gave us voluntarily, we have enough to charge both of them with fraud, conspiracy, structuring of financial transactions, unlawful imprisonment, and filing a false death report. Travis Payne is being picked up at his home in Pooler as we speak. Daniel released my wrist. He stood up, walked to the one-way mirror, and placed his palm flat against the glass. On the other side, Derek sat alone, staring at the table, his handcuffed wrists resting on the metal surface like a man who had already begun serving his sentence. Daniel spoke without turning around. He said it was just business. His voice was steady, but the surface was thin, and beneath it, I could hear the weight of every night he had spent on that folding bed. Every Tuesday, he had heard the door open and close. Every hour he had believed he had killed a child. 5 years in a box. My father dead. My mother alone. My son, wearing the same shoes, for 3 years. He lowered his hand from the glass. Just business. I stood up and put my hand on his shoulder. I did not tell him it was over, because I had already said that once tonight, and the word felt smaller now. Too small for what had been done to us. Instead, I stood beside him, and we looked through the glass together at the man who had called our lives a transaction, and we said nothing. Because silence was the only language large enough to hold what we felt. Travis Payne was arrested at 9:47 that evening at his rented duplex in Pooler, 11 miles west of downtown Savannah. 2 officers from the Savannah-Chatham Metropolitan Police knocked on his front door. He answered in a white undershirt and gym shorts, holding a half-eaten bowl of cereal, and when they told him the charges, he set the bowl on the porch railing and put his hands out without saying a word. He did not ask why. He did not ask for a lawyer. He stared at the ground the way a man stares at the ground when he has been waiting for a knock that took 5 years to arrive. Detective Castillo called us at 10:15 to confirm. 3 arrests. Derek Payne, Lisa Monroe, Caldwell, Travis Payne. All 3 in custody. All 3 processed. Bail hearings would be set within 48 hours, but Castillo said he would recommend no bail for Lisa and Derek based on flight risk, the offshore account, and the severity of the charges. Frank drove Daniel and me back to my apartment behind the bakery. The streets were empty. Savannah, after 10 o'clock on a weeknight, is a city made of shadows and Spanish moss, and the oak branches overhead formed tunnels that swallowed the headlights and gave them back in pieces. Nobody spoke during the drive. Daniel sat in the back seat with his eyes closed, and I watched him in the side mirror, the way his chest rose and fell, the small red mark on his collarbone where the medical adhesive had pulled at his skin when he removed the recorder. He was breathing. He was free. And in the morning, I would have to explain all of it to a 6-year-old boy. We arrived at 11 minutes past 10. Frank parked on Bull Street, walked us to the door, and told us to sleep. He said he would be back in the morning. He said there was one more thing to do, but it could wait until daylight. I did not ask what it was. I had used up every question I had. Daniel did not sleep. I heard him in the kitchen at midnight, opening and closing the cabinets slowly, the way a person does when they are relearning the geography of a familiar place. I got up and found him standing at the counter holding a coffee mug I had not used in years, the blue one with the chipped handle that Henry used to drink from every morning. He was not drinking from it. He was just holding it, turning it in his hands, pressing his thumb into the chip where the glaze had worn away. "Dad used this one every day," he said. "Every single day," I said. He would not let me throw it away. Daniel set the mug down on the counter and looked at me. His eyes were dry, but the skin around them was dark and thin. And I realized that in 5 years of captivity, he had probably not slept more than a few hours at a time. Always listening for the door, always waiting for the Tuesday delivery, always afraid that one week the groceries would simply stop coming, and the silence would become permanent. "Mom, I need to see Oliver." I had been thinking the same thing since we left the police station. Oliver was at Lisa's house on Abercorn Street. Lisa was in jail. That meant Oliver was alone, or with a neighbor, or with someone Lisa had called before the arrest. The thought of my grandson sitting in that colonial house surrounded by furniture bought with stolen money, waiting for a mother who was not coming home, was more than I could hold. I called Castillo. He answered on the second ring even though it was past midnight. I asked about Oliver. He said a social worker from the Department of Family and Children Services had been dispatched to the house at 9:30. Shortly after Lisa's arrest, Oliver was safe. He was with a licensed emergency foster family 3 blocks from his school. Castillo gave me the address and said I could visit in the morning after filing a temporary custody petition with the Chatham County Juvenile Court. I wrote the address on the back of a bakery receipt and put it on the kitchen table beside Henry's blue mug. Frank arrived at 7:15 the next morning carrying 2 coffees and a manila folder. The one more thing he had mentioned the night before was the custody petition. He had drafted it before sunrise using a template from the Chatham County Court website, filling in every line with information he already had. Margaret Caldwell, maternal grandmother, 65. Sole owner of Caldwell's Bakery, established 1955. Daniel Caldwell, biological father, alive, recently recovered from unlawful imprisonment. Oliver Caldwell, age 6. Currently in emergency foster care following the arrest of his mother, Lisa Monroe Caldwell, on charges of fraud, conspiracy, unlawful imprisonment, and filing a false death report. Frank slid the folder across the table. Sign it. Both of you. We file at 9 when the courthouse opens. Daniel signed first. His hand was steady. I signed below him, and the pen felt heavier than it should have, as though the ink carried the weight of every check I had written to Lisa. Every January transfer, every dollar that was supposed to protect the boy I was now petitioning a court to let me raise. We filed the petition at 9:03 at the Chatham County Juvenile Court on Montgomery Street. The clerk accepted it without delay. A hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Frank said the combination of Lisa's arrest, Derek's full confession, and Daniel's reappearance made the petition as strong as any he had ever seen. He expected the judge to grant temporary custody to Margaret and Daniel within the week. At 10:15 that morning, I drove to the address Castillo had given me. A small yellow house with a chain-link fence and a plastic tricycle in the front yard. The foster mother, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour on her apron, opened the door and called Oliver to the living room. He came around the corner slowly, wearing the same discount sneakers Derek had mentioned in his confession. The ones that cost $30 a pair. The only thing $250,000 had ever bought him. He saw me and stopped. Then he saw Daniel standing behind me in the doorway, and his face did something I will never be able to describe with words, because words are too slow for what happened on that boy's face. It moved through confusion, then recognition, then a kind of terror that comes from seeing something you have been told is impossible. And then it broke open into something so bright and desperate that I had to press my hand against the doorframe to stay upright. "Daddy?" Daniel dropped to his knees on the foster family's linoleum floor and opened his arms. Oliver crossed the room in 4 steps and hit his father's chest so hard they both rocked backward. Daniel wrapped his arms around his son and held him the way you hold something that has been stolen from you and returned, damaged but alive, with a grip that says, "I am never letting go, and I am sorry, and I am here," all at the same time. Oliver buried his face in Daniel's neck and said the words that started everything. "I told Grandma to stop the money. I told her to watch." Daniel looked up at me over Oliver's shoulder. His eyes were wet. His arms were locked. And in that small yellow house, on that linoleum floor, in front of a stranger's tricycle and a foster mother who was quietly crying in the kitchen doorway, my son held his son, and the 5-year silence finally ended. The custody hearing took place on a Monday morning in courtroom 3B of the Chatham County Juvenile Court on Montgomery Street. The room was smaller than I expected, with pale wood benches, a single window letting in a strip of October light, and a judge's bench that sat only 2 steps above the floor. The brass nameplate read Honorable Patricia Rowland. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and old paper. Frank sat in the first row behind us. Daniel sat beside me at the petitioner's table, wearing a borrowed blazer slightly too wide in the shoulders. Oliver was not in the courtroom. Castillo had arranged for him to stay with the foster family because a 6-year-old did not need to hear what was about to be said about his mother. Our attorney, Catherine Marsh, 52, a family law specialist, Frank, had called the morning after the arrests took the case pro bono after reading the police report. She told the judge that Margaret Caldwell, 65, was the biological paternal grandmother, sole owner of a bakery in continuous operation since 1955. She told the judge that Daniel Caldwell, the biological father, was alive and had been the victim of unlawful imprisonment for 5 years. She submitted the petition, Daniel's identification, my financial records, and a letter from Detective Castillo confirming the circumstances. Lisa's court-appointed attorney requested a continuance. Judge Rowland denied it. She reviewed the documents for 14 minutes, asked 3 questions, and granted temporary sole custody of Oliver Caldwell to Margaret and Daniel Caldwell, effective immediately. The hearing lasted 31 minutes. Daniel's hand found mine under the table when the judge spoke the word granted. He squeezed once, hard. This time there was no glass between us and the thing we wanted. This time, the boy was ours. We picked Oliver up from the foster family's yellow house at 11:40. He was sitting on the front steps with a backpack between his knees, wearing new sneakers the foster mother had bought him. When he saw Daniel through the car window, he stood so fast the backpack fell sideways and ran to the car before I had fully stopped. Daniel opened the rear door, and Oliver climbed into his lap and did not let go for the entire drive home. The criminal trial began 4 months later, in January, at the Chatham County Superior Court on Montgomery Street. The proceedings lasted 9 days. Frank attended every session. I attended every session. Daniel attended every session except the 3rd day. When the prosecution played the audio from the recorder, his attorney advised that hearing his own voice ask those 5 questions in a courtroom full of strangers might break something that had only just begun to mend. He waited in the hallway on a wooden bench, with his head bowed. When I came out during the lunch recess, he asked one question. Did they hear enough? They heard everything, I said. The prosecution built its case in 3 layers. The first was the fire. The state proved that Lisa and Derek conspired to stage Daniel's death by arranging the studio fire on East Broad Street, substituting an unclaimed cadaver obtained through Travis Payne's connection at Memorial Health, and providing fabricated dental records. Travis, as responding firefighter, ensured no DNA analysis was conducted and the case was closed as accidental. The second layer was the imprisonment. Lisa and Derek confined Daniel in Building 12 on East Industrial Avenue for 5 years by telling him he had caused the death of Sophie Miller. Sophie, now 20 and a music student at SCAD, testified on the 4th day. She told the court she had left the studio before the fire, suffered only a minor burn on her left hand, and had never been contacted by anyone about the incident. She cried twice during her testimony, both times when she looked at Daniel. The third layer was the money. The prosecution presented 5 years of bank records, wire transfers, and offshore logs. Frank testified as a fact witness on the 6th day. $250,000 sent by Margaret Caldwell, $162,000 spent on personal luxuries, $88,000 transferred in structured deposits to Coastal Property Holdings LLC in Nassau, Bahamas, $60 per year spent on Oliver. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours. Lisa Monroe Caldwell, guilty on all 7 counts. Conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, unlawful imprisonment, filing a false death report, structuring financial transactions, identity fraud, child neglect, sentenced to 12 years in the Georgia State Prison System, ordered to pay restitution of $250,000 plus $60,000 in punitive damages. Parental rights terminated. Derek Payne, guilty on 6 counts. Conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, unlawful imprisonment, structuring, filing a false death report, accessory to child neglect, sentenced to 14 years, ordered to pay restitution of $250,000 jointly and severally with Lisa, plus $60,000 in punitive damages. Travis Payne, guilty on 3 counts. Conspiracy to commit fraud, filing a false death report, obstruction of justice, sentenced to 5 years, ordered to pay $25,000 in restitution and permanently barred from employment in fire or emergency services in the state of Georgia. Judge William Hardin read the sentences on a Friday afternoon. The courtroom was full. Frank sat in the second row with his black notebook open. Sophie Miller sat in the fourth row, with her left hand resting on her knee, the hand that had healed in 2 weeks, the hand that still played piano every Thursday evening on Bull Street. Daniel sat beside me, and when the judge read Lisa's sentence, he did not react. His face was still. But beneath the table, his knee pressed against mine, and I felt it trembling. When the courtroom emptied, and the bailiff led Lisa and Derek through the side door in handcuffs, Daniel and I walked out into the January air. Savannah in January is cold in a way that surprises people who think the South is always warm. The wind came off the river and cut through my coat. 12 years, he said. 12 years, I said. He nodded slowly. Then he took a breath that seemed to start at his feet and rise through his entire body like water filling a vessel that had been dry for a very long time. Let us go get Oliver from school, he said. We walked down Montgomery Street toward the car, side by side, and the courthouse shrank behind us with every step. 6 months after the trial, on a Saturday morning in July, I woke at 4:30, the way I always do. The apartment behind the bakery was dark except for the thin blue light that comes through the kitchen window before the sun clears the rooftops on Bull Street. I lay still for a moment and listened. From the spare bedroom I could hear Daniel breathing, slow and deep. From the small room beside his, the one we had converted from a storage closet into a bedroom with yellow walls and a bookshelf shaped like a tree, I could hear nothing, which meant Oliver was still curled under his blanket with his knees pulled to his chest the way 6-year-old boys sleep when they feel safe. I got up, put on my apron, and walked through the narrow hallway into the bakery kitchen. The ovens needed 45 minutes to reach temperature. The sourdough starters had been fed the night before and were ready. The croissant dough I had laminated on Thursday was resting in the walk-in cooler, layered and folded and waiting to be rolled. I turned on the lights, and the kitchen came alive the way it had come alive every morning since 1955. One switch at a time, one task at a time. Flour, and butter, and heat, and patience. Daniel started working at the bakery in February, 1 month after the trial ended. He began with deliveries because his hands shook too badly to pipe icing, and his concentration would fracture without warning, a sound or a smell or a shadow falling at the wrong angle, sending him back to the warehouse for a few terrible seconds before he could pull himself out. Frank had recommended a therapist, a woman named Dr. Ellen Soto, who specialized in trauma recovery, and Daniel saw her every Tuesday and Thursday at 10 in the morning. By March, the deliveries expanded to counterwork. By April, he was mixing dough. By May, he could pipe a straight line of icing across a sheet cake without stopping. By June, he was baking alongside me from 5 in the morning until noon, and the rhythm of the kitchen, the timers and the kneading and the steady rotation of trays in and out of the oven became a kind of language between us that did not require words. Oliver started first grade in January at a public school 4 blocks from the bakery. Catherine Marsh, our attorney, had filed for permanent custody the day after the trial ended, and Judge Rowland granted it in March without opposition. Lisa had no standing to contest. Her parental rights had been terminated as part of the sentencing. Daniel was listed as the sole legal parent, and I was listed as the secondary guardian. Oliver's last name was officially changed from Monroe Caldwell to Caldwell on a Tuesday afternoon in April, and when the clerk handed Daniel the new birth certificate, he held it with both hands and read the name 3 times. Oliver James Caldwell, as though he needed to see the letters to believe they were real. Oliver came to the bakery every day after school. He sat at the small table beside the window where customers could see him, and he did his homework while eating a warm croissant that I set beside his pencil case at exactly 3:15. He was quiet at school, his teacher told us. He did not raise his hand often. He did not play rough at recess. But he read 2 grade levels ahead, and when the class had a music unit in April, he sat at the classroom keyboard and played a melody that made his teacher call me to ask where he had learned it. His father taught him, I said. Before everything, Daniel bought a piano in May. A used upright, slightly out of tune, from a shop on Broughton Street. He and Frank carried it up the narrow staircase to the apartment and set it against the wall in the living room, between the window and the electric fireplace where the brass urn used to sit. The mantel was bare now. I had thrown the urn away the night we came home from the warehouse, wrapped it in a garbage bag and put it in the dumpster behind the bakery. I did not want the smell of coffee grounds and cinnamon and vanilla powder in my home ever again. The mantel held a framed photograph instead. One Frank had taken on the courthouse steps the day custody was granted. Daniel and Oliver and me, standing in the January cold, not smiling exactly, but standing together, which was enough. On that Saturday morning in July, after I had loaded the first trays of croissants into the oven and set the timer for 18 minutes, I heard the piano. It came through the wall that separated the bakery kitchen from the apartment. Soft and careful. A melody I had not heard in more than 5 years. Daniel was playing. It was the same piece Oliver had recognized in Forsyth Park, the one that had drifted out of Brood Awakening coffee shop on that September afternoon, the one that started everything. And in the middle of the phrase, exactly where it had always been, there was the wrong note. The deliberate, intentional, perfectly imperfect wrong note that Daniel had put into the music when he was 20 years old because he said perfection was boring and the mistake was what made people listen. I stood in the kitchen with flour on my hands and I listened to my son play the wrong note, and I did not cry. I had done enough crying. Instead, I smiled, and I wiped my hands on my apron, and I opened the bakery door at exactly 6 o'clock the way I had opened it every morning for the last 40 years. Old Gene was the first customer, the way he had been the first customer every day since Henry died. He ordered black coffee and a plain biscuit, sat at his usual table by the window, and opened the newspaper. He looked up at me and tilted his head. "Piano sounds good this morning, Margaret." "It does," I said. At 6:30, Oliver appeared in the kitchen doorway in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes with one fist and holding a stuffed rabbit with the other. He climbed onto the stool beside the counter and watched me roll out the second batch of croissant dough. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he looked up at me with the same steady brown eyes his father had and his grandfather had, and he said something that made me stop rolling and press both hands flat against the flour-dusted counter. "Grandma, Daddy is playing again." "I know, sweetheart. He is playing the wrong note." "I know." Oliver picked up a small piece of dough from the counter, shaped it into a crooked crescent with his fingers, and set it beside my perfect rose. "I like the wrong note," he said. "It sounds like us." I looked at the crooked crescent sitting among the straight ones, and I left it exactly where it was. If you have been through something like this, if someone you trusted built a life on your grief, I want you to know that the truth has a way of finding you. It found me through a 6-year-old boy and a piano and a note that was never supposed to be right. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment. Tell me your story. And if you are still waiting for your wrong note, keep listening. It is coming.